We all know that activating schema or activating what people's prior knowledge is about reading is very important. It facilitates reading by helping them integrate what they're reading with what they already know. So sometimes reading the questions before reading helps them kind of weed out what's irrelevant or what's inaccurate when they're reading, and that helps them be able to get better answers to the reading comprehension questions and focus in on what's important. So we want some kind of guided activation of prior knowledge, and there's lots of ways to do that, and we're going to talk about some of those. So here's a couple. I used this particular reading checklist with a child who was just fascinated by dictionaries, loved dictionaries, would look at them for hours and hours. One time he was reading a passage and he was reading at a quite high level for me to look at his decoding skills, and he said, causal, no, casual, an informal mode of attire. So this child really was very motivated by dictionaries and things like that. So we used a combination of letting him read the questions first and then giving him words to find in the dictionary. And we selected a word in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, so that would keep him reading until the last because he could look those up in his dictionary. KWLH is a very common practice to activate schema. So you start off with talking about what they know, brainstorming what they know, and you put that in the K column. And then you talk about what you want to know, and you put that in the W column. And then after you have the learning experience, or you read and gather information, you talked about what you did learn, and you summarize what you learned, and you check to see if you learned all that you wanted to know, and then you talk about how can you learn more, where could you go to find more information. So let's look at an example of that. So here's an example of KWLH used on dinosaurs, and how we activated the schema in the what we know and what we wanted to find out. And then we had a film and some reading, and actually we had a fake archaeological dig, and then we filled out what we learned and how we can learn more. Priming, we know, is an evidence-based strategy, and it's simply the previewing of information. And it's really used to create competence before problems develop. So we can use priming before we read, either to acquaint them with the story itself that's going to be read, or to acquaint them with the types of things that are going to be discussed in the story. Certainly encouraging knowledge of text structure is really, really important. You can do this by story retellings, by doing plays. I use graphic organizers quite often. I use one for each genre. I don't mix that up a whole lot. I may change the picture on the top to make it look nicer or reflect the theme, but I try and keep the same organization, because what I want them to do at the end of that time is to be able to recreate that graphic organizer to support their writing. So here you can see makes things visually clear and permanent, supports comprehension, helps transform information, and then supports the production of written products. I think the way that graphic organizers makes associations and connections within a story or within a text is vital. So I use graphic organizers all the time. But again, I want to warn you not to use so many different kinds of organization that the children get confused. This is actually a type of graphic organizer that I use occasionally, a who did what sequence. So they get an idea of the characters and what they do throughout the story. This is the same semantic web that I showed you before in conversations, but it's also great as a precursor to writing, to flesh out what they're going to read about, to activate their schema, brainstorming, things like that. Okay, so now we go to the one real study that we have, and that is anaphoric cueing. O'Connor and Klein did a study where they looked at different kinds of supports for increasing comprehension, and they found that anaphoric cueing was the most effective. And anaphoric, or anaphora, is really the reference of the text back to earlier elements. So, like, John wore a red sweater. He wore it to school. He thought he looked very handsome in his red sweater. So did Susie. And so you want to know who the he is. He is John. And that kind of pronoun use is often very difficult for children with autism. They tend not to realize who the pronoun is referring back to. Other kinds of indefinite words are also hard for them. Something, someone, stuff, things like that. So what they did was they had them read sentences and then choose from 3 possible reference, and it was the most effective in increasing comprehension. So here's a list of some of the unspecified words that you see they might have trouble with, and this is an example of how I give simple checks throughout reading. So the duck was having a hard time climbing the trees in the usual way. It hurt his feet. And so I'd separate out his feet, and are they Joel's feet, the duck's feet, or Mrs. Nelson's feet, and the child would have to circle. Cloze procedure is another way of supporting reading comprehension, and O'Connor-Klein found small gains in reading comprehension using Cloze procedure. Requires the students to make use of the information in text and make predictions. So they had to fill in the blank, basically, and it increased self-monitoring of the correctness of the response and initiated rereading. So it's worth doing also.